what is Upstate Venture Connect's most important theme, and that is give first. We use those words, we toss them out. Our goal here is to maybe provide a little context of what does that mean, and how could we top talking about give first without exemplifying the people that we've got right here with both Marnie and Jack that will have their insights we will share. Before we get there though, let me back up and at least say, how did we get started on this track from a UVC perspective? Because yes, we've been working at that goal of trying to connect entrepreneurs to the resources they need to start and grow companies. Not sure, I've been doing this for 11 years. And I had the really good fortune to maybe follow some people that really showed how it can be done. If you've cracked More Good Jobs, you might see Brad Feld wrote the foreword for More Good Jobs. Brad Feld, if you're not familiar with him, is very noted as not just a successful venture capitalist and has been phenomenal in terms of his returns that he's generated over the years, but he's also really known for building startup community. And I've had the opportunity to know Brad for 25 years. And before he even moved from Boston, where he began his entrepreneurial journey, he moved out to Boulder. And this was in 1995. Right? And in 1995, Boulder was not what we would call a big town with regards to tech. And TriNet, we were selling to emerging tech companies. And even though Boulder was a nothing town, I decided to open a TriNet office in Boulder just because Brad Feld moved there. And a short 10 years later, Boulder has the distinction of being a community that had the highest ranking of venture capital per capita, or the third highest. San Francisco first, Silicon Valley second. They used to differentiate San Francisco from Silicon Valley in those days. And then Boulder was number 3. So in 10 years. So Brad wrote the book called Startup Communities that chronicles how did they take Boulder and create this phenomenal success over a relatively short period of time. And in that book, he mentions part of his philosophy was give before you get. And he kind of plays on what goes around comes around. That was really part of our origins. Techstars, which Brad is a co-founder of, then evolved give before you get to now that term we call give first. And it's been more broadly adopted far beyond Techstars to the point that the idea of give first without asking for something in return, and before you may even have developed trust with someone, those are the essential elements behind the give first philosophy. So with that background, now here we have two people that not just talk the talk, but walk it, all right, and walk it in a lot of ways. Last evening, we heard about Jack Greco. I mean, to receive the award as the ecosystem champion, the David Allers Award, is itself recognition upstate-wide for what he's done. And Marnie, as the founder and CEO of Launch New York, is also someone that you'll hear has a lot to give in this area. So, Jack, we've got a snippet of your background from last night, but if you'd want to build any more on specifically things that help put you on this path for Give First, what might they be?
Well, first of all, thanks for having both of us. I mean, I grew up with, a good mom and a good dad, right? I mean, that's where kind of it all starts. And I grew up in a culture where, like, it wasn't like, I didn't think Give First is too long, right? I mean, like, giving is part of everything, right? We have a whole holiday for it in November. It's one I like a lot, but it's just this concept of, like, if you constantly keep pushing things out, like, kind of what I've learned is if you just take what you have and you just keep pushing it out there, you don't realize what backfills it. And maybe it's karma, maybe it's like, people noticing it and starting to like follow those actions. But to me, I mean, giving was all about just doing what kind of came naturally, right? I mean, we're special because we can connect with each other, right? And giving is a really easy way to start those types of relationships. So, I mean, for me, it just kind of came from where I came from. I think is probably the way to put it. And it's just, I mean, so like business is just people working together, right? So I mean, to be able to give first in this entrepreneurial sense, it's like giving to people who are trying to change things. Like, why wouldn't we support those people? You know, I've always said there's two ways you can, you know, kind of spend your days. You can try and grow the biggest, strongest tree possible, or you can kind of try to make a forest. And I always thought it was a lot funner to play in the forest than to stand in front of a really big tree.
Marnie, since you haven't had a chance to address the group yet, you've got a lot of friends in this audience, but also some new people. So maybe start with a thumbnail sketch of the journey that you've been on as an entrepreneur before even getting to your current organization, and, so that people have some context.
Yeah, and I think I want to take up that metaphor of the big tree versus the forest. And so my moment probably came when my husband Rob was, back in Buffalo. I'm on the road to New York City, and it's my second startup ride, and he's got kids, the 8 and 10-year-old, and it's everybody knows these crazy stories. And I'm in the Buffalo airport, and it's the same group of 5 people flying to the city every week. We're all in different industries, and we're all saying, what can we do back upstate? I mean, it was awesome. It was this wild ride with the .com, the New York City that is still around, but and the money and the bonuses and the stock options and the going public twice in 2 years in 2 different companies was just this, Mr. Toad's wild ride is what we all know of. So really exciting to take the work I had done at University of Rochester as a clinical psychologist in behavioral medicine and start creating health IT, what we know today. This was in the 1990s, so the railroad tracks were not so well set in terms of adoption. So we went public with that, and really incredible. So I learned by being with other people, but then getting on the road. And I will say the one thing that motivated me to try to bring back the brilliance of the people that I worked with, particularly in New York City, a company called Medscape. And when I got there, my boss was the former 17-year editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, George Lundberg. So I thought I had died and gone to heaven. So that brilliance was phenomenal, but the desire for so many of us in that airport to bring it back to upstate New York is what turned me on to really going down the road of a nonprofit leader. So admittedly, I ended up in a university environment, an economic developer. So I was academician, turned entrepreneur, commercializing what we did in our behavioral science lab, to ultimately helping entrepreneurs, but doing it through economic development. So as much as we've talked about not having the government piece in the mix here, I have to say I've become a specialist in how to actually bring that public money into the mix in a hybrid way, and we'll no doubt talk about a grant that we just received, $750,000 to support truly, frankly, the Give First agenda. So for me, what happened was going back to upstate New York and seeing other startups and realizing my journey was because of the role models I had and being with a team. I wasn't doing it myself. I was the key part of the product development and then ultimately sales, biz dev. But I realized that if we did not create that same recipe, the recipe that ultimately created ACV and made it possible to flourish in upstate, made it possible for TriNet to flourish in Silicon Valley, we were not going to see the benefits of new economy in upstate. So that grabbed me, and every day I wake up, I would see people who could join forces and create magic, and all I had to do was connect them in many cases. And that, you can just tell, it motivates me every day, and sometimes frustrates me that we don't do more to make it happen. So my journey was learning to be an entrepreneur. Didn't have a huge part of that in my family necessarily, but now today, one of the things I have to say, now that ACV really has shown that upstate can make a unicorn happen, now I'm becoming a little bit obsessed with the whole DEI arena. So Launch New York today, we provide pro bono mentoring and access to the most active seed fund in New York State. We're a nonprofit, 501c3. We model ourselves after other venture development organizations nationally. New York State didn't buy into this model, so I've had to bootstrap this with a couple of co-founders and partners. And ACV's CEO, George Shimon, is actually our chair. And I've got a couple of venture capital folks, Zach Schulman, who was here. And I want to thank the folks who've really been paying it forward, because working with a nonprofit is always a give first mentality. So obviously the UVC team here, you guys are amazing. Siva is one of our entrepreneurs in residence, and also Kate, when she stepped out as well. And so we have investors, we have mentors, and we'll talk more about, we've created a structure to try to make it possible for all of you to give first as well. Because I think what happens is people will contact me and say, hey, I'm at this stage in my career, I want to give back, I want to give first, I don't actually know how to plug in, how do I do it? And I feel like all of us in this room are trying to plug people in, and so hopefully by the end of today, we'll have a few new tricks in the trade for all of you.
All right. And that's maybe a good segue into the whole discussion around the volume of connections. Both the two of you, we would look at across upstate New York as super connectors. I mean, you have established reputations, you have deep networks, a lot of knowledge, you can help a lot of people. So if you were to say over the course of an average week, how many times are you having a discussion where you're qualifying either an entrepreneur or a community supporter? Maybe they're saying, how can I help? You love those kind of asks. But there are also a lot of people that are saying, hey, I'm not trying to help launch New York, I'm just trying to get help for my company, or or some other activity. So you're both approached on a regular basis for asks, and then you also have to allocate some time to who you want to do that proactively. So over the course of an average week, about how many interactions along those lines, or connection requests or expertise you get?
Disgusting amounts.
Like,
I
give us some parameters.
So there's actually a pretty good software that I'm lucky enough to be an investor in out of Europe called Bridge, the Bridge app. And so it actually will track this. So I haven't looked at it recently, but I think I've made something like 1,200 connections in the last like 10 months. So I mean, that's pretty, and I mean, those are like vetted sources on either side. I bet you probably at least a third of the people in this room I probably connected with somebody. Yeah, right. So, and it's been interesting because like the way to make connections now during COVID, right? This is a really nice event because we're getting to see each other in the flesh for the first time in a while, right? But I mean, making connections when you're going off like, you got to blow off your Rolodex and be like, I think I remember this person doing this, but it's not relevant. It's tricky. I mean, I actually have cooled down a lot over the summer, but it was to the point where I was taking, when I was, so I had the good fortune to do a project with Techstars and Brad. Brad's one of the guys I kind of always looked up to. Yeah, he was one of the guys that, he gave all his money away when he sold his first company. Angel invested all of it. I said, well, he did it, it worked out great, so I kind of followed in his footsteps. But, when I was doing the Techstars thing, I was taking somewhere between like 50 and 60 meetings a week. And it was with individuals, and the goal was, I would ask them to do something before the meeting, I would have a meeting with them, ask them to do something afterwards, and I would try to make like 3 to 5 connections for each one. So it was even worse. I mean, worse in like a good way, but I mean, it also burnt me out a little bit too,
So I can say, I'm really fortunate that we were able to grow Launch New York so that we have over 300 active client companies working with our pro bono mentorship at any given time. So I've got 3 dozen entrepreneurs in residence, and Elisa, I'm sorry, I did not leave you out as well. Incredible folks who are out there in the field. So I feel like I have this team of people who are trying to figure out what these companies need. So myself personally, it's interesting. So I still obviously get a lot of people coming to me, and I kind of can't say no. So I would say it's about a half a dozen a day.
Okay. I mean, we're talking a high volume here. If you look at both of you, what percent of those interactions are inbound because somebody's ringing you up versus ones you're initiating proactively? How would you put percentage-wise on things?
So if you let it happen, like you get to this point, right? It's like a self-fulfilling process. If you let it happen, they will all be inbound. but then you don't have any control over it either, right? Like I got to the point where it's just like, I literally would have to put up like automatic away messages on Gmail, even though I wasn't away, to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be, and it would be very vague, right? It'd be cryptic, it'd be like, I'm going to be gone for a while, that's it, right? You know, like, but I personally look, I mean, like the universe gives you what you're supposed to get sometimes, right? So you gotta let it come in. I mean, for me, it's probably like 2/3 inbound. I try to do 1/3 outbound, because that's when you really actually get to say, oh, this interests me, not who am I interested to, right? And I would rather be the hunter than the prey, but you don't get to do that as much as you like.
Yeah, I've struggled with the same thing. We created the infrastructure, so if somebody's coming in, even if I've talked to you for 2 hours and you're an entrepreneur, I'll still say, I need you to just fill out our online application. It's just, you know, and it's, in some respects, I feel like it has allowed us as an organization to filter people who are willing to actually go through some steps, because we need them to be the owner and the leader ultimately. We're here to help, but we always call it, we're the coach, we're not the player. And when we ask anyone else to help as well, we think in those same terms. So I would say right now I'm probably 75% incoming still and 25% outbound. But because I am responsible for fundraising for Launch New York, that outbound piece is very strategic, and right now it's heavily built around trying to get more mentors to work with all of these companies who've now advanced to a point where it's more complicated what they need. My one-on-one model, and I did really look at models across the country. We chose to pay our mentors, and now I have a mix of people who just want to dabble. They may want to work with a handful of companies and they didn't want to volunteer. My investment committee is entirely volunteer, including Adam Wallen, who had ties to upstate, but he's part of Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Venture Fund. And he's out of Boston. He literally gives us an hour every week to hear our company's pitch. So the generosity of time, I feel like I want to be that intermediary that helps people plug into this, because it is the most rewarding thing you can possibly do in your career. And there are just days that you forget the number of people you're touching, and then people come back to you and say, did you know this happened because of what your team did or what someone said?
Well, let's actually take that as an example. If you could each share such a story where somebody you touched, you made a referral, and as a result of that referral, something transformational happened to that company, and then lo and behold, you find out about it. Again, I'm sure you each have dozens of stories, but go ahead and share one for the group.
No, you first.
All right.
First.
So my favorite recent one, and this is, I think maybe will be near and dear to a lot of people's hearts in this room. An individual whom I met through a colleague, we were raising an LP fund. He decided to come to the LP fund. He went into our investor network, which is just essentially like a digital open angel group. So you come in as little as 10K into our deal. So he was paying attention to the companies, and he contacted me probably 6 months after all this activity got going, and he said, hey, I'm in the fintech space, as you know, and I'm retiring from being on the road. I'll still be doing some consulting, and you can hear that sort of hedging his bets, like, I'm not totally sure how much time I have to give, but what do you have for me? He only wanted to volunteer. He didn't, want to kind of get into that paid role. And I said to him, well, as a matter of fact, I have a portfolio company. I said, it's a bit of a stretch for fintech, but in upstate New York, this is kind of what I have right now. And so I took the steps I sent him the company's materials, and I said, they could really use your help. They're definitely struggling. They've pivoted at least twice, and we're thrilled to hear they're going into another NSFI core class. However, as an investor, this is not great. And he thoughtfully reviewed the PowerPoint and the other material, and he got back to me and said, not totally sure. And you could tell he was, for the first time, trying to figure out, for a real startup, what was his role going to be. I think there's a little nervousness sometimes on the quote new mentor's part as to whether they'll provide value. And I'm saying, hey, I'm not saying there's no expectations, but listen, this is all an experiment. It's a new relationship. So I made the introduction to a company that, frankly, our investment committee was very concerned, and just said, we had turned down some follow-on money and said, we just pivoted too many times till you get some more traction. We just can't do anything. And lo and behold, this person goes in, helps them reassess their model. So they completed the pivot, and he was actually able to introduce them to funders on the East Coast. So they came back, said, just close it on a new round, and here's how it's looking, here's the new talent that we have, many new contracts. I mean, the end of the story is not written, but what an amazing connection that gives value to someone who, by the way, with the baby boomers going into this retirement, semi-retirement mode, if we don't make use of that talent, shame on all of us. But I have to say, those are ones where it set the stage for this new grant that we have to create these mentor panels, which are sort of proxy boards for these companies who typically do not have a governing board at this stage, right? They're mostly pre-Series A. So I've tried to listen to the market and say, how can I take all these amazing people asking me about opportunities and how to get involved, whether it's, time, treasure, talent, any of that combination, and turn that into something that's scalable. And that's a lot of what we're looking for your insights as well, because we know you're all out there. And we can be here, but what is the succession plan to what Launch does now? What's the succession plan to this guy writing a bridge email this long every week telling everybody the great stuff going on in the ecosystem? So that one was very heartwarming, and I'm excited to actually return to him, use the customer discovery to optimize how I do this going forward and how we work together to create these mentor panels over our next 3 years of what we call Fast Forward.
Jack?
So there is a gentleman in the back of the room who could probably tell the story better than me. But, so Slavik, if you want to raise your hand, him and Izzy are from Poland, and I got to meet them through, he went to a Techstars program up in Toronto. It's Neil up there who I think was trying to get me to put money in or something. It was fun, I don't know. He made the intro because he knew I had an automotive background. So when I met them at Car Scanner, I randomly, and look, they always say it's better to be lucky than good, right? The majority of the connections I make are complete guesses. I'm just like, oh, I think you can, Marnie can tell you how many times I've randomly put her on a text string with a number that she doesn't know. I'm like, oh, this is Marnie. She just launched New York. She's going to make it go through a process, but don't worry about it, right? So Slavik was, I become a small investor in his company. And we were talking a little bit about what some of the options are. He was going through a fundraise, and I said, hey, you know what? On a whim, there's this competition out in Syracuse called Genius NY, and I connected him with Jeff, just thinking, I'll take a look at it, right? Like I talked to him, and this was a while ago, and I thought I had a rough idea what Genius wanted to do. And then lo and behold, he ended up, winning, and he's in the competition this year. So, and we're all rooting for you, Slavik, because these things. These like random. I wish John Yankee was here, right? Like I'm the smallest investor. And, randomly, he almost didn't want to let me in. And I said, John, I got no money right now. I said, but I will be your best investor. And when he came in, I said, let me make an intro to you. And I introed him to Bessemer. And then Bessemer ended up doing his subsequent next 2 rounds, and he's on his way to being a unicorn, right? Maybe, would he have gotten there on his own? Probably, right? Like, I don't think that I've actually created anything. I just kind of move things a little bit faster, right? So
age. Commonality between these stories is recognize the relationship with the party who was being helped was really pretty thin, all right? But even though trust had not been earned, the help was provided. And this puts people in what we like to call that super connector category of giving first. We have here, I should have pointed out one of our sponsors, Carl Graham from Cooley, who's in the front row. There's a guy that I personally learned from a lot about Give First, even before Brad Feld went to Boulder, all right? We're talking a very long time ago. So Carl has business development and marketing for Cooley globally. And here he is, coming from Austin, Texas to upstate New York. Why? Well, please catch him during the break and ask him, but I thank you, Carl, because he does set the example for Give First, extending even to a community like ours, coming here all the way from Austin. So lots of good first examples in this room, and it's something I deeply appreciate. So let's go back to thinking about how we scale this up. Because it's one thing for us as individuals, we set the example, and we know that being good role models makes a difference. And we know the more people we help, in some ways we get that word out there, but to really energize an entire region, you have to think about scalability. Marnie has touched on a few programs that are gonna help us. Jack uses Bridge, all right, as a tool. Are there other thoughts you wanna inject into the discussion on how can we really have a force multiplier so that we get more and more people giving first?
How can we do more of it? Look,
How can we extend the network with a force multiplier?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's good, like, what's happening with ACV, and I mean, like, there's gonna be a half dozen unicorns in the next 3 years or most, right? There just are. And there's a lot of people individually doing it. I think this collaborative stuff, you know, I have the unique position as being the guy that, I mean, prior to launch, that really spent his time rolling through, you know, along the 90, trying to, at one time, I came up with this idea of like folding them, right? Like if you took Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse and combined them, we're like the 20th largest GMA that's out there, right? But individually we're like 50th, 51st, and 80th, and we're just not there, right? Like, and so I think just being able to collaborate more than, I mean, like Buffalo is a city that still has a lot of, you know, it still has a lot of walls and has a lot of barriers in it, right? So I mean, I try and personally operate like a free radical, showing up being like, well, it's okay to, you know, go against the grain and, you know, not follow like a rubric and a process, but it's you could be successful no matter what. And I think as long as founders keep coming out and are loud and proud about being, you know, I've been fired from every single job I ever had, and that's okay, right? So you can do it too. I think people just need to be able to try and figure that stuff out, right? And I just don't think we talk enough, like, across the entire upstate is like being proud about, you know, the upper half of New York State collectively. Now UVC and Launch, and there's other organizations that really started to do that. But I mean, when we realize what we have collectively, right, this whole concept of give first, it's like upstate New York needs to be like a big pop-up dinner. And if we all take what we have and push it into center, we'll realize that we actually already are doing this, and we can benefit from each other, you know? I mean, I think with COVID slowing down a little bit and people getting back to bouncing around, connecting around, more networking events, right? Those are the kind of things, these kind of like ad hoc, human first things that we need to do, you know? And I think the most important thing is like, in order to give first, trust can't be earned. Because how am I gonna earn trust from you and then give you first? It's never gonna work. So you just have to like blindly trust, knowing you're gonna get screwed over a couple times, but that's okay. This is life. There's no dress rehearsal, you get one shot at it. So that's my thought.
I have found that trying to use the financial incentive, and I know give first is not supposed to be anything in return, but what I found in trying to raise a nonprofit seed fund, which is the way venture development organizations get going, is I had half of the people say, you know, love what you're doing, yeah, I'll donate, you're a 501c3, I get a deduction, swell. I love upstate New York and love startups. The other half, actually more than half, said, you know what, I love what you're doing, but I'd really rather invest. And so I built those tools, and what I'm finding is the example that I just gave you was a person who came in because of the financial discussion, but he ended up giving, and he didn't, you know, it wasn't about, hey, I put a lot of money in this company, nothing like that. So I actually think that we have to start thinking about how to build the networks in that way. So for me, the investor network, and I actually modeled this after a website, ourcrowd.com, somebody may know of, and it really started, you know, Jewish community of investors. It's over 40,000 accredited investors who trust each other. They have a relationship, and I had the great joy of meeting John Medved and saying, I'm copying what you're doing in upstate New York because I need an affinity play for all these people who have an interest, but putting the financial trappings around it actually gets more people coming into the mix. In the original days of UVC, you had a network that you built to, and you still do, obviously, with UNY50, but at that time it was a, hey, I want to come and sign up to help people. The problem is that is still too much like Walmart shopping, not a tailor shop, right? A boutique place that we all want to be in. We want to trust who's referring people to you and what happens after that. So I do think those technology-enabled structures are really critical. And with the pandemic, we now are up to almost 160 accredited investors who've jumped in. We're doing some really interesting outreach through LinkedIn to people So there's Interesting Sales Navigator, and their personal emails from me, but we're reaching out to hundreds of people every month, and I have had the most fascinating conversations. People are saying, yeah, I'm on the West Coast, but yes, I went to college in upstate New York. And so this is going to be a process of showing them that we have a trusted, vetted vehicle for making connections, because otherwise they will continue to just stay and invest where they're located. And one other thing I'll just toss out as well, I think we're at a beautiful time to take advantage of, what the pandemic has forced on us from a technology standpoint, but we also can take advantage of the aging trends. So I will say, any of the fundraising and anything I've talked about that I do, millennials and younger get what I'm saying in about 2 seconds. And so that is the group that is coming into the decision-making roles and ability to be accredited investors. So one of the neatest examples, we have a friend of family. She took over her father's insurance business. It's a regional workers' comp insurance business. And she just wanted to meet with me, talk to me about this investing stuff. I explained Buffalo Angels, and she's like, no, I don't want that. And so she and the business and her father all came into our LP fund and the investor network. And she contacted me again now about joining boards and, what am I, I'm not, what skills do I bring? So she's 35. And I'm loving this because I'm saying, I'm trying to feature you as someone, maybe I'm doing this online, webinars, whatever, is to the next generation who is really going to make all of this a heck of a lot easier than I think we found.
My last question, before we'll see if we take a few minutes from the floor. All right, I was just gonna say, the last question then will be, we know that we have in this group a lot of people who wear an operating hat and are trying to grow their business. And they tell themselves, yes, I do believe in the philosophy of give first, but I really don't have the time to get engaged. So I know as you speak with entrepreneurs and encouraging them to be involved in the ecosystem, you help remind them of some ways they can benefit from participating, even while they're very, very busy in building their businesses. Please share some of those messages with the group, and then we'll close it up.
Yeah, I mean, this one's easy. If you literally have 1 hour a quarter, I will put that to work. You could just hear that one introduction, one comment back on a pitch deck, one anything that you do makes a world of difference. And so if you only have that little bit of time and just dipping your toe in, and by the way, you might only have that now, but in 6 months or in 12 months, your life changes, and suddenly you now have a relationship with any of the ecosystem players, and we're here to make sure that we're helping these entrepreneurs that are in the room today grow. Yes, I would just encourage you, take the risk, and you can pull back later. I was talking to John Yankee about it, and he's like, yeah, I gotta stop saying no. Because I at Civa, I walked in yesterday, and I said, Civa, I need you to help the company. So you can start saying no later, but I think you will find it so incredibly rewarding that you'll want to make time for this.
Being a former operator, it's easy to think you are the busiest person in the world. You are not. So if you think you're special and you don't have time, it's kind of bullshit, right? And I know because I've lived it. It is easy to give one thing, no matter how little, every single day. It does not mean, it's as simple as when you're going to get your coffee in the morning before you go into the office, call one of your employees that you know drinks it and buy one. If you don't have the time to do that, you shouldn't be running your company because it's too inefficient, right? I mean, it's gotta be the little things, because the truth is, at the end of the day, if you aren't giving away, what you're gonna be left with is maybe you'll have a profitable company, maybe you have a bunch of money, maybe you'll get your name up in lights, but you're not gonna be happy, right? Giving is the easiest way I've at least found to find a sustainable rate of happiness. And whether you're an operator, for those in the room that have kids, running a business is not the same thing as having a child. It's even harder, and you find a way to do it as a parent, right? You find a way to do it as a spouse or a child or whatever, so there is no excuse, right? I mean, you should be able to give every day, and you should be able to be kind. And if you're not able to do those two things, you really need to think about what you're doing. Pardon my French. Right?